Wendigo because of overabuse. Sometimes a family will have one family member that is really taken advantage of and being mistreated, maybe one of the children of the family, or maybe an elder of the family. And that's a certain kind of Wendigo. That is a very terrible one too.
Cryptids, mythica, fantasy, and sci-fi. We are everything monster.
Welcome back, Monsterites, and if you're new here, then I invite you to subscribe and become a Monsterite, a monster lover like the rest of us. It's been a while since I've gotten into a cryptid. Today's monster seems to be of interest to a growing number of people. It's native to the North American/Canadian region and is simply put, malevolent. Allow me to share the actual origins and depictions of the Wendigo. The evil spirit that devours mankind, or as later interpreted by a German explorer, cannibal. Portrayed by the Ojibwe or Chippewa Native Americans as emaciated giants practically appearing as living corpses surrounded by the stench of death, decay, and corruption. The Wendigo, or Wendigo, as per original Ojibwe pronunciation, is a being or figure of endless torture. It is said to grow the size of its last victim meal, being never satiated and therefore forever hungry, stalking and haunting prey in a starved craze. The Wendigo's name has been translated as Spirit of the Lonely Places, or in the whereabouts of Minnesota, Windwalker, both of which will make more sense when we return to its various descriptions. The origins of this cryptid's lore span from several Algonquin tribes or cultures. The Algonquin people, whom call themselves Omamiwinini, meaning the downriver people, are indigenous to the Canadian regions spanning from Alberta eastward to Quebec and Ontario exhibiting the most significant populations, and downward to North Dakota and Great Lakes surrounding states of the US. The Algonquin language family groups that share stories of this very eerie monster or spirit known as the Wendigo, or plural Wendigogue, are the Ojibwe, Cree, Naskapi, and Innu people. Therefore, before we proceed on to the details of the Wendigo, we must first make note of the harsh environment these resilient societies hail from, for it plays an important part in the lessons that the Wendigo brought to the people and how that may have been the purpose behind its creation. The wilds of the northern lands are unforgiving, providing sustenance only to the toughest and best adapted animals. Winters seem punitive, encouraging migratory behavior, and as in such, creatures must learn to cooperate and stay together strong. Stories of Wendigo out in the deep forests and caves not only help to persuade tribe members to stay together, but also through its tellings of being an eternal unsatiated predatory glutton, advocate food preservation, ethical rationing, and not resorting to cannibalism. These are in fact issues that would arise. Such is the truth behind many a fairy tale creature. What better way to steer a child straight than telling and retelling allegories featuring terrifying beasts or spirits? Therefore, whether the Wendigo was ever real or not, its existence had already pierced the minds of many, warning of the dire straits to come if you were to stray off alone, or feed on more than was your share. And so this brings us to how the Wendigo was actually said to come into being. There are several versions of the entity that only really differ by how tangible they are, the outcomes being almost all the same except for the first examples. For in this lore, if one overindulges and succumbs to the spiky black grasps of greed, and thereafter possibly even cannibalism, the spirit of the Wendigo will take over their mind, creating for a possessed, crazed individual frightful of their cravings for human flesh, or worse yet, surrendering to this horrendous act. These outcries of looming Wendigo spirits are responsible for hatching the controversial, more modern term, Wendigo psychosis, similar to the clinical term of lycanthropy in that both disorders were directly inspired by monsters, though Wendigo psychosis differs slightly in how explicitly cannibalism-oriented it is. Nevertheless, in this case, the person remains human. In other Wendigo creation lore, the spirit takes possession, and over time the person themselves turns into a monster, stalking the woods at night. The tall, gaunt remains of a human only serve to seek out and devour more flesh. A life of misery, with anguish squealing from the depths of its shriveled stomach. Aside from the person themselves becoming the Wendigo, there was also a notion that they would remain human, dead or alive, but imprisoned within the monster until, depending on the legend, being saved and rescued or destroyed with the beast. Other than eating a human being, Wendigo spirit initially involved or not, an alternate way of becoming a Wendigo was if you had been bitten by one. Similar to how werewolves are known to come into being, and also similar to werewolf lore, is another way of turning into this lanky tower of bone and skin via curse from a dark sorcerer or a shaman. All these means consisting of a gradual change. And lastly, if one were to ever have a nightmare with the cryptid in it and hear it calling their name, or even dream of ice and snow, particularly amidst a vision quest, the body would then be vulnerable enough for the Wendigo spirit to take over, leaving the waking victim forever changed now as host to the evil spirit or entity. And by the way, yet a third parallel to lycanthropic lore, as expressed by some believers, are not just the negatives that become one as they shift into this monster, but the benefits, such as heightened sense of sight and smell, improved abilities such as strength and speed, and the obvious increase in size, becoming a physically superior being to a degree. Whether influenced by unknown entities or existing as a mental disorder of a starving individual, reports date back hundreds of years, and just as with the witch and werewolf trials, many individuals lost their lives, most likely due to false accusations and poor solutions. The Wendigo has been expressed by many names depending on the geographical region and people. Wendigo, Witigo, Atush, Witiko, Kokojo, Atsen, Witiko, Windigo, Witiko, Witigo, Tunijak, and others, some of which overlap with Bigfoot such as Nakani. This, in my opinion, certainly earns it some respect as an intriguing cryptid worth investigating. As touched upon during the list of how one becomes a Wendigo, we saw its essence range from ethereal to massive in physical size. Some stories claim it to be a giant or skeleton of flexible ice with a heart of ice within, reaching as high as the tallest mountains, while others a tall corpse with exposed large teeth or fangs, glowing red eyes, and sharp claws. Stranger yet, additions to its physique exist in other tellings, such as having a star on its forehead and being covered with fur, or the phenomenon that it could only be seen from the front, as sideways it is imperceptibly thin. The spirit versions, it appears, had overlapping in their descriptions with the physical versions, as both mention of its 15 to 40 foot height. Again, in some covered in fur, while in others in taut, famished skin. The line between spirit and physical was at times very skinny in ancient lore. An even further puzzling rendition exists in some tribal references where it has the ability to change form for more effective hunting. Now is probably a good time to bring up the fact that nowhere in the aforementionings of the Wendigo were we greeted by a humanoid beast with the head of a stag or the skull and antlers of one. Many monstrous characters of ancient times were evoked with certain ambiguity surrounding their appearance, and interpretations change over time, but it seems that the inspiration for the antlered conception gained momentum after 2001's release of Wendigo. The movie's creator, Larry Fessenden, admitted that his creation was an amalgamation of an old Native American legend he had once learned of, with inspiration from Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark's Wendigo tale. Since then, antlered Wendigo have been posted all over the internet and even featured in TV shows, games, and more films such as Antlers, which hasn't yet come out at the time of this presentation, and therefore I can't completely affirm what goes on in there, though I'm sure soon the comment section will be filled with updates on that. Nonetheless, due to this confusion, it would also not be surprising to assume that many monster lovers and amateur cryptozoologists mixed or overlapped the tellings of the Wendigo with the Wachuge, which, similarly to the Wendigo, is a monster or monstrous entity that feeds on humans, though in the Wachuge's case and appearance, tropes of animals such as deer are commonplace, as giant animal spirits play an important role within its lore. There are ancient cave paintings of humanoid figures with antlered heads, such as the sorcerer of this French cave painting haunting, and such head coverings have been known to be worn in Native American ceremonies. So it's not so far-fetched that there could have been a Wendigo conception adhering to this look, but resources confirming this are simply rare. The Wendigo has lived in so many stories within such a primal place of our Earth that pinning down where our first encounter of it could have been may be near impossible at this time. The sources that fed the legends were most likely from a mix of events and purposes. Should we further question its earliest origins or simply accept the passed down campfire tale of the first victim to become a Wendigo being a warrior who had made a deal with the devil to gain great powers to overcome his tribe's enemies? Once he gained his victory, the second half of the deal would go into effect, leaving the man banished from his people, cursed with cannibalistic longings. This story sounds familiar though. Haven't we heard of dealings with the devil from other parts of the world? The sounds of obvious European colonist influence as the devil per se was not present within Native American spirituality. That said, one of the earliest of unfable-like reportings that is more easily recollected due to its language and context is of a Jesuit. These guys were everywhere recording everything. As you may recall, one of the first written mentionings of Bigfoot was also by a Jesuit nearby this era of 1661. He reported the strange account of a group of settlers at a rendezvous point being seized with an ailment unfamiliar to him and the others. They were afflicted with a combination of mental disorders, making them hunger for flesh with such ferocity that they would pounce upon other people and even their children. This predatory instinct was engorged with an unfulfilling greed to devour more, like veritable werewolves, he alleged. The only solution the meeting groups could muster was their death. Sounds like a case of Wendigo psychosis? Actually, the term didn't even exist until the 1920s when a missionary diagnosed a dangerous group with cannibalistic urges as having psychoneurosis, a term that later changed, giving credence to the monster. I'd like to thank Christian, Toby, Rain, Dante, Tammy, Ramin, Cloud, Joseph, and all my supporters at Patreon for helping to bring these Cryptozoology series and others to life. We have explored the regions in which the Wendigo reside, thankfully from the comforts of our own homes. But now, having a better understanding of what they are, at least according to the commonalities between the various legends, where is the evidence? How can a colossal human figure in the middle of nowhere not have been made big news by now? Could it have been that later reportings of this creature got confused with Sasquatch? Are there footprints in history that are convincing enough to take accounts of the Wendigo more seriously? These and a deeper exploration of any evidence will be what I'll be digging into in a future installment on this, may I say, quite enigmatic member of cryptozoology. As I've mentioned, I haven't seriously researched a cryptid in some time, but the last time I did and made a video, although a couple years old now, I'm still quite proud of. Check out my full coverage of Sasquatch, particularly if you find great interest in the Wendigo, as you may find some answers there, or better yet, come up with some questions no one else has of yet. I have been Monster Master Arthur. Your support as a viewer and contributor of any sort is always greatly appreciated. Thank you, and I'll see you over here somewhere.